Sit down. I already poured your drink. You again, another case keeping you up at night? No, don't apologize. That's what I'm here for. You talk, I listen. And when you're done, you leave a little lighter than you came in. So, what is it this time?
This one's old, early 2000s, but I still think about it. A man came to me because he thought his wife was cheating. That's half the work in this business. People sit across my desk and you can tell right away some want to be wrong. They're hoping you'll come back with nothing. Tell them it was all in their head. This guy, he didn't want to be wrong. He already knew, he just needed it on paper. What happened after that? I've never seen a man's life fall apart that fast. 72 hours, start to finish. The client came to me through a friend of mine on the force, I'll call him Dan. Dan walked into my office on a Tuesday morning, sat down across from my desk and didn't say anything for about 10 seconds. Just looked at me, sizing me up. Then he said, I need to know what my wife is doing when she says she's at her mother's house. He was calm, too calm. In my line of work, you learn to read people fast. Some guys come in red-faced, shaking, already halfway to doing something stupid. Those are the ones you have to talk down before you take the case. Dan wasn't like that. He had the kind of calm you only see in someone who's already processed the anger and come out the other side. Here's what he told me. Dan and his wife had 2 kids, 4 and 6 at the time. Good kids from the sound of it, young enough that they still told you everything about their day without knowing what mattered and what didn't. And that's where the thread started. The kids kept talking about grandma's house. His wife's parents lived about 90 minutes away. Once a week, sure, that's normal, twice maybe, but 3 times a week, every day she wasn't at her part-time job. Dan asked her about it. She said the kids just loved going. They wanted to see grandma, nothing strange about it. But Dan said she was never a good liar. Something in her face, a micro expression, maybe half a second, and he'd know. So he started tracking the mileage on her car, wrote it down every morning and every night in a little notebook he kept in his desk drawer. After 2 weeks, the numbers told the story. 400 extra miles a week that didn't add up. Not if she was just going to her parents' place and back. Then she handed him the key to everything. One morning, Dan sat down at their computer, one of those big beige desktops, remember this was the AOL era, and found a sticky note with her email password taped right next to the keyboard. She'd probably put it there to remember it and forgot to take it down. Dan logged in. He found emails between his wife and her college best friend. Long, chatty exchanges, the kind where people say the things they'd never say out loud. And there it was, his wife bragging about sleeping with some ex-boyfriend from high school, meeting up with him on those grandma days. They were laughing about it together. His wife even made fun of the guy's own wife, calling her fat, saying she'd let herself go after having kids. Dan didn't scream, he didn't throw the computer. He printed every email, all of them, put them in a manila folder, and stashed the folder in his car. Then he called my buddy on the force and said he needed a PI. That's how he ended up in my chair. He slid the folder across my desk, put down a retainer check, and said 5 words. Find out who this guy is. In 20-something years in this business, I've had a lot of clients, but I remember the ones who sit in that chair and decide they're going to be strategic instead of emotional. Those are the cases that end differently. Dan was one of those.
The quiet ones, they're always the most thorough.
I did what I do: surveillance, documentation, camera work. The boring, tedious stuff that doesn't look like anything from the movies but wins cases in court. Within 2 weeks, I had the full picture. Dan's wife would drop the kids at her parents' place around 9 in the morning. She'd stay for coffee, make small talk with her mother, play the part. Then she'd leave around 10, drive about 40 minutes to a restaurant near the highway and meet a man for lunch. Nice place, nothing fancy. They'd sit in a booth in the back corner. I got photos of them from the parking lot. After lunch, they'd drive separately to a motel about 10 minutes away. A dump. The kind of place that charged by the hour and didn't ask questions. She'd stay 2, maybe 3 hours. Then she'd drive back to her parents' place, pick up the kids, and head home like nothing happened. Same routine every time, like clockwork. I had dates, times, locations, I had license plate numbers, I had photos of them walking into the motel and photos of them leaving, everything documented, everything time-stamped. But Dan hadn't just asked me to confirm the affair. He wanted me to find out everything I could about the other man. So I dug deeper. The guy's name, I'll call him Bob, married, 3 kids of his own. On the surface, Bob looked like he had it all figured out. Nice house, nice car, corner office. But when I started pulling at the threads, the picture changed. Bob was VP of sales at a company called, well, I won't name it. What I will tell you is who owned that company. His father-in-law. Everything Bob had, the title, the salary, the house, the car, all of it flowed from one source, his wife's family. The house they lived in, owned by his in-laws. The career he built, at Daddy's company. Take his wife's family out of the equation, and Bob had nothing. No independent income. No assets in his own name, nothing. When I showed Dan that report, he didn't react the way most clients do. Most people get angry all over again. Some cry, some start talking about what they want to do to the guy. Dan just sat there, reading, nodding slowly, like a chess player who just realized he's 3 moves from checkmate. Then he looked up at me and said, Ron, I need you to do one more thing for me. I leaned back in my chair. What's that? I want you to meet someone, Bob's wife, and I want you to show her everything. I've been in this business a long time. I don't usually get involved in the fallout. I find the evidence, hand it to my client, and let them do what they need to do. But Dan had a specific reason for asking me. If I tell her, he said, she'll think I'm lying, some angry husband making things up. But if you show her, a licensed professional with a full report, with photos, with dates, she'll know it's real. He had a point, and something about the way he said it, the care in his voice, told me this wasn't about revenge. Not entirely. He'd seen those emails. He'd read his wife mocking Bob's wife for gaining weight after having kids. And I think some part of Dan felt that woman deserved to know what was happening behind her back. So I said yes. Dan didn't rush it. He spent the next 2 weeks getting everything in order, hired a divorce lawyer, had the paperwork drawn up, made copies of my report, photos, timestamps, everything, and put them in separate folders. Then he laid out the plan. On the same morning, the exact same morning, 2 things were going to happen at the same time. First, his wife would be served with divorce papers at her workplace. A process server walking up to her desk, papers in hand, no warning, no conversation. She'd be blindsided. Second, I would drive 90 miles out to Bob's neighborhood and sit down with Bob's wife, face to face, and show her everything. Same morning, 2 detonations, synchronized. Dan's logic was airtight. If you serve the wife first, she calls Bob to warn him. Bob gets ahead of it, spins a story, maybe convinces his wife nothing happened. If you tell Bob's wife first, same problem, word gets back before the divorce papers land. But if you do it at the same time, nobody gets to control the narrative, nobody gets to prepare. The truth hits both houses at once, and there's nothing anyone can do to stop it. So that's what we did. On a Thursday morning in early spring, I drove out to Bob's neighborhood. Nice area. Big houses, trimmed lawns, the kind of street where people wave to each other and pretend everything's fine. I knocked on the door. Bob's wife answered. She was a pleasant woman, looked tired but pleasant. I introduced myself, showed her my license, and asked if we could talk. We sat at her kitchen table. I opened the folder and started laying out the photos. One by one, her husband at the restaurant, her husband walking into the motel, her husband's car in the parking lot, over and over, on different dates. The timestamps, the emails, including the ones where Dan's wife made fun of her weight. She was quiet the whole time. She didn't interrupt, didn't cry, didn't scream. She just turned the pages one after another like she was reading a medical report about someone else's life. When she got to the last page, she sat there for a long moment. Then she looked up at me. "Thank you," she said. 2 words, that's all. I've been in rooms with a lot of people getting the worst news of their lives. But that thank you, I'll never forget it. Because it wasn't gratitude. It was recognition. She already knew. Somewhere deep down, she already knew. I just gave her permission to stop pretending. I drove home. Dan called me that evening. The process server had delivered the papers at 10:15 that morning. His wife had tried to call Bob immediately. But by then, Bob's wife had already been sitting at that kitchen table with my folder open in front of her for 20 minutes. Nobody got ahead of anything. Nobody got to spin. The truth just landed on both of them like a hammer, and there was no cushion. Dan told me he didn't feel happy about it, didn't feel sad either. He said it felt like setting down something very heavy that he'd been carrying for a long time. I understood that.
Simultaneous detonation. He planned it like a demolition.
Now, I didn't have to investigate what happened next. It was all public record. Court filings, police reports. You could read the whole thing like a novel if you knew where to look. The first domino fell within days. Bob's wife cleaned out their joint bank account, every penny, took the kids and left the house. Then she called her father. Now remember what I told you about Bob's situation. Everything, his career, his home, his entire lifestyle was built on his wife's family. And the foundation of all of it was one man, his father-in-law, the guy who built the company from nothing, the guy who gave Bob a VP title because his daughter loved him. When that man picked up the phone and heard what Bob had been doing to his little girl, Bob was fired by the end of that day. No severance, no 2 weeks notice. Security walked him to his car with a cardboard box. But that wasn't the worst of it. See, the house, the nice house on the nice street, the one Bob had been living in for years, raising his kids in, that house was owned by his in-laws. It was always their property. And now that the marriage was over, Bob had exactly zero claim to it. He got an eviction notice within the week. So let me lay this out for you. In about 72 hours, Bob went from being a VP of sales with a 6-figure income, a beautiful house, a wife, and 3 kids, to unemployed, bankrupt, and sleeping on a friend's couch. If he was lucky enough to still have a friend willing to take him in, and Bob did not handle it well. He went back to the house, not his house anymore, to try to talk to his wife. It escalated. Her brother happened to be there. Big guy, protective. When it was over, Bob was walking to his car with a broken nose and blood on his shirt. After that, it was a cascade. Restraining orders. More incidents where Bob showed up when he wasn't supposed to. Police reports stacking up. Criminal charges. A night in jail. Then another. His divorce was brutal. His wife's attorneys took everything. And since everything was connected to her family's money anyway, there wasn't much for Bob to fight over. He was arguing from a position of absolute zero. I've watched a lot of people's lives fall apart in this line of work. It's practically part of the job description, but I've never seen one collapse that completely or that fast. It was like pulling one card from the bottom of a house of cards and watching the whole thing come down in slow motion. Bob left the state after the divorce was finalized, just disappeared. You can't find him online anymore. No social media, no professional profiles, nothing. It's like he evaporated. His ex-wife, she did more than okay. She went to work at her father's company, the same company that used to employ Bob, learned the business from the ground up. When her dad retired a few years later, she took over, runs the whole operation now. 3 kids, all doing well. Funny how that works. As for Dan, his divorce was clean, at least as clean as these things ever get. The infidelity didn't matter much in the proceedings. In our state, it didn't really affect the settlement. But Dan wasn't after money. He was after a clean break. He and his ex kept it civil for the kids. They communicated through lawyers at first, then later through email, short and businesslike. No drama, no fights in front of the children. He told me once, years later, that he didn't hate her. She was his children's mother, and that was the only context she existed in for him. Nothing more, nothing less. His kids are adults now. Both of them turned out well. Dan's got a quiet life, the kind of life you build when you decide you're never going to let someone else's choices destroy you. Me, I still keep that case file in my bottom drawer. The AOL emails, the motel surveillance photos, all of it, not because I need it for anything. It's just a reminder that in this business, the ones who stay calm, the ones who think 3 moves ahead instead of swinging blind, those are the ones who walk away standing. Bob swung blind. Dan played chess. And 72 hours was all it took to see the difference.
He finished his drink after that? sat there for a moment. He always does. You know what I find fascinating about this one? It wasn't anger that destroyed Bob. It was architecture, a plan with no wasted motion, no shouting, no threats, no ultimatums, just precision. Humans are remarkable when they choose patience over rage. So here's what I want to know. If you found that sticky note with the password, would you have logged in, or would you have walked away and never known? Same time next week, I'll be here. I always am.